Eurovision, a cultural phenomenon that came into existence for the first time in 1956 and was organized by the European Broadcasting Union as a means through which to unite Europe after the unimaginable pain, destruction and devastation that World War II left the continent with. The contest has grown exponentially ever since, with new countries and continents joining the show, eager to proudly present their culture and identity via the biggest non-sport event in the whole world, while also being a part of a community that sought to unify people and nations despite borders and differences through the universal language of music.
The very first Eurovision Song Contest was born, created to unite Europe through music. This show was created to unite the world through music.
United by music.
United by music!
Framed as apolitical, the very core of the contest has always been political, for good or worse. It has been a crucial platform of acceptance and a bastion of freedom, despite the recent controversies that have swept the contest in regards to the inclusion of Israel, a state that has been using the contest to spread political messages and promote a false narrative regarding their actions in Gaza, that have repeatedly breached international law and have been widely condemned all over the world. But what happens when Russia, a country that was excluded from Eurovision due to waging a gruesome and despicable full-scale invasion against Ukraine, marked by constant crimes against humanity, decides to do their own spin of the contest? What happens when a terrorist state manages to bring back a contest from the age of the Soviet Union and the Iron Wall to shamelessly promote propaganda and use it as a soft power to distract from their crimes, behind the empty promises of cooperation and unity through music? This is what happened with Intervision, and here is everything that's wrong with it. Hello, hi, вітаю, добре дошли, it's your boy, Gorom, your favorite and the most hated Slavic Eurovision correspondent, and welcome back to the home of hatred.
Guess who's back?
Eurovision 2026 is upon us, and we're back for season 2. Ugh, we've never been so back. Being so avoidant lately, I feel like my father. Before jumping into the mess that the 2026 contest will be, in this episode we will be taking a step into the complete opposite direction of it, and we will be embarking uncharted and evil territories, so buckle up. Listen, this is by far the worst way to kickstart a new Eurovision season, so I would rather call this a preamble, not the full introduction.
Do you want spoilers?
I'm a silly guy that takes a lot of pride in horsing around and taking the piss all the time, but this video will be on a very serious matter. Something that I wish I never had to make a video on, something that is truly despicable, so much so that having to conduct the extensive research that I did and having to watch it made me nauseous and sick to the very pit of my stomach. This channel doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I would rather that I made this video than somebody else, because I feel like I have a very unique viewpoint when it comes to this issue, and the balls to call it out, to the very last speckle of Putinism there is. Additionally, events like this have to be called out and condemned, and I have no problem with putting this target on my back. As you can already tell from this intro and from the title of this video, in this episode we will be talking about Intervision 2025, Russia's very own spin of our beloved Eurovision. We'll be focusing on the history of the contest, how it suddenly came back from the dusty old Soviet wardrobe, like one of the skeletons in my closet, how the Kremlin brought it back to whitewash their crimes in Ukraine, and everything that went wrong with it. A very big disclaimer in the beginning. Hi, hello, listen up. This video's aim is to share the evilness that inspired this abortion of a contest and to expose the underlying issues with supporting events of this nature. It's an expose of how Russia has weaponized Eurovision and how it has actively tried to justify its crimes through culture and as a means to establish their presence on the international table while trying to sweep their inhumanity under the rug. I'm partially Ukrainian myself. I know these tactics firsthand, and this video does not have a single ounce of sympathy for the occupier or for anyone affiliated with it. Ukraine is fighting a genocidal war, a war of survival in this very moment. So I would encourage you very eagerly to donate and support the cause of Ukrainian people against an evil and destructive colonial and terrorist entity. You can do this by scanning the QR code shown on your very screen right now, or check out the description of this video to find links through which you can provide aid. Before we begin, as always, I'm reminding you that you can always subscribe. By subscribing, you will not only enjoy everything Eurovision presented in a very mental way, but you will be a part of the Gorom Mental Asylum, our big dysfunctional family.
Why have you forsaken me?
We do video analysis on everything Eurovision and more, and I have so many things in store for all of you for the 2026 season, so please stick around. Without further ado, let's start from the very beginning. What is Intervision?
Привет, Москва!
Как же мы ждали сегодняшний день. День, который точно войдет в историю.
So, let's get one thing straight. Intervision is not a new phenomenon. Originally named the Intervision Song Contest, it was an international song competition that ran from 1965 until 1968, then again from 1977 to 1980. The original Intervision Song Contest was born behind the Iron Curtain, at a time when East and West competed in everything. In the Cold War, there was a space race, an arms race, and culture wars too. It was quintessentially the Soviet bloc's answer to Eurovision and was organized by the International Radio and Television Organization, OIRT, an Eastern European network of radio and television broadcasters that in 1993, following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, merged with the EBU. The contest kick-started in 1965 and took place in several locations in Czechoslovakia, but got suspended 3 years later after the anti-Soviet uprising in Czechoslovakia. It returned in 1977 in the Forest Opera in Sopot, Poland, only to meet its demise in 1980, gaining the status of a Soviet time relic forgotten in time. The Eastern Bloc equivalent to Eurovision obviously had blatant political undertones, yet the contest was not completely isolated from the West, as nations such as the Netherlands and Spain occasionally send entries, same thing as with countries that maintained neutrality during the Cold War. Finland won the whole thing in 1980. I'm sure that the Kremlin would argue that they won only because they are a historical Ruski province, something that they have enjoyed talking about a lot lately. The coke be snowing in them propaganda studios is all I'm going to say.
And that is the truth of the matter.
Going back to the website of the new, grossly refurbished version of Intervision, you can see the bold claim that the world-famous music event returns to Russia. But the contest was in fact conceived in the 1960s Czechoslovakia, not the USSR. And it definitely did not serve the purpose of exclusion or whatever the Russian propaganda is weaponizing the contest for nowadays. Actually, the first series from 1965 to 1968 was explicitly designed to bring East and West together, with the Czechoslovak television offering to collaborate with Eurovision organizers, and it featured Western artists along Eastern European performers, including Eurovision winners. Big names from the West made guest appearances in the East. The aim was not to culturally separate the Eastern Bloc from the West, it was actually to attract interest of Western commercial record companies. It's not like they were communists that wanted nothing to do with capitalism. And it's absolutely bonkers to claim that Intervision was Russian or a Soviet thing when the Soviets themselves were not even invested in the early contests. And during the course of the old Intervision, the USSR only won twice. Crickets. Quite literally. Before departing to more recent times, the most fucking insane aspect of the Soviet time Intervision was the voting system they used. TV viewers turned their lights on or off to cast votes, with the results measured by electricity consumption.
Few viewers had personal telephones, so they were encouraged to turn the lights on in their flats when they liked a song. The state energy company then recorded the size of the power spikes and passed the results on to the TV station.
Excuse me, what? Moving on, the contest ended its journey in the 1980s, and a couple of years later, after the fall of communism, the former Eastern Bloc embraced the political changes and were eager to compete in Eurovision. So they did. Russia was also a country that took part actively over the course of the years, sparking controversies left and right due to the underlying political tones found within their entries. More on that later, however. After 2014, as Russia's international isolation grew over its illegal annexation of Crimea, Russians increasingly began to present themselves as one of the last bastions of conservative traditional family values based on false narratives of Orthodox Christianity and purity culture. As Eurovision has always been a camp spectacle that actively celebrates freedom and freedom of expression and LGBTQ+ representation, the contest was actively under fire in the Russian political sphere. chapter, with calls to withdraw and stop exposing the kids to the woke gay agenda or whatever those people love throwing around. Talks of bringing back Intervision were taking place in 2014, again particularly due to Russian anger at the moral decay of the West, particularly in response to the iconic victory of Conchita Wurst at Eurovision 2014. That one sparked huge controversy outbreak in the Russian peace-loving society, to the point that in one TV tirade that year, politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky described Conchita's win as the death of Europe, while the audience shouted Russia, Russia, Russia and waved Russian flags. Again, the depth of the Russian soul is just so breathtaking. Fucking imbeciles.
Fucking imbecile.
And as I already mentioned, the planned revival of Intervision, a Eurasian rival of Eurovision, was seen as a part of Putin's broader cultural diplomacy agenda. Despite plans to stage a contest in both 2014 and 2015, nothing happened. Thank the fuck God that never came into fruition. Clearly, from that point onwards, Eurovision and Russia were on a collision course, as Eurovision made a point of welcoming the LGBTQ+ community, presenting itself as a showcase of inclusivity and diversity. In contrast, Russia launched a crackdown on gay rights and criminalized public expression of LGBT identity. President of the Russian Federation and a wanted war criminal, Vladimir Putin, has held Russia up as a standard barrier of traditional values, in the face of what he considers the moral decadence of the West, with the Russian Supreme Court labeling the international LGBT movement as extremist in late 2023, a decision that opened the doors to members of the LGBT community or right defenders being handed lengthy prison sentences. And that brings us to the next chapter, the events that took place in 2022.
Лучшие артисты из разных стран собрались на одной сцене, чтобы доказать: у вдохновения нет границ.
On the 24th of February 2022, before 5 a.m. Kyiv time, Putin announced a special military operation which effectively declared the ongoing brutal, illegal, inhumane, terroristic and unjustified war on Ukraine.
Принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
The Ukrainian broadcaster Suspilne asked the EBU to ban Russia from the Eurovision Song Contest in 2022. However, contrary to public belief, the EBU was not interested in helping Ukraine, arguing that Eurovision is a non-political cultural event and said that they would still invite Russia to participate in Eurovision 2022, while Russia was bombing Ukrainian cities and trying to conquer a sovereign, independent country out of imperialistic motivations. Despite Russia clearly showing that they're not interested in neither uniting nations nor celebrating diversity. After pressure and criticism from fans, artists and several broadcasters, 9 to be specific, including Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden and Ukraine, on the 25th of February 2025, the EBU took the decision to exclude Russia from participating in Eurovision 2022, as the inclusion of a Russian entry in the contest would bring the competition into disrepute. On February 26th, a day after the exclusion of Russia from Eurovision 2022, the 3 Russian state medias, Channel 1, VGT-RK and Radio Domostankino, that were members of the EBU, terminated their EBU memberships, condemning EBU's ban as an inappropriate political sacrifice at a music forum that has always emphasized its non-political status. On the 1st of March, the EBU suspended their memberships, and on the 26th of May, the suspension became indefinite, making them ineligible to participate in any EBU events. In November 2023, Russian Minister of Culture Olga Lyubimova and Channel 1 Russia's Director General Konstantin Ernst revealed at St. Petersburg's International Cultural Forum that the broadcaster was planning to produce a revival of the Intervision Song Contest featuring the member countries of BRICS. And this brings us to the next chapter, the absolutely nauseating reality we were made witnesses of last week.
After a 35-year gap, Russia is holding a Soviet-era song contest called Intervision to rival Eurovision.
On the 3rd of February 2025, Putin signed a decree ordering the return of Intervision, scheduling it to be held in the Moscow area on September 20th.
Intervision, less kitsch,
Интервидение.
but more Kremlin.
The goal was framed as one of developing international culture and humanitarian cooperation, while only inviting friendly countries to take part, aka those willing to embarrass themselves on public display by being actors in a well-orchestrated Russian propaganda shitshow. Putin's Intervision decree appointed Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Chernyshchenko as chair of the organizing committee and Deputy Chief of Staff Sergei Kiriyenko as chair of the contest supervisory board. Both of them directly affiliated and fucking employed by the Kremlin, and Sergei Kiriyenko is one of the Kremlin officials overseeing the annexation of Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine and managing the sham referendums in them. Plus, he is responsible for other politically sensitive operations, including controlling internet and information spaces, propaganda, culture, social control around the war narratives. As I will be stressing later in the video, we're starting to see how Russian Kremlin officials were entirely running the whole thing. It was not broadcasters, it was Kremlin officials.
Спасибо!
According to Russian Senator Lilia Gumerova, the contest was planned with the aim of trying to promote real music and rejecting fake values that are alien to any normal person, referring to Eurovision's inclusion of LGBT artists. The contestants are encouraged to emphasize respect for traditional, universal, spiritual, whatever that means, and traditional family values. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed that Intervision will be free of perversions and abuse of human nature as we saw in the Paris Olympics. This same motherfucker, the old one that looks like he just sucked on a whole box of lemons and is about to die from clogged arteries, Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, confirmed on September 16th that there were countries whose artists were willing to participate in the contest, but their governments prevented them from participating. And I quote, "Anyone who wants to come will always be welcome," said him, which is so not true, but okay. I'm sure if Estonia for some reason wanted to do that, they would not be let in. Anyways, pretty later on, it was revealed that 23 countries were going to take part, most of them being from BRICS, CIS, Latin American and Middle Eastern states. Basically Russia's irrelevant buddies and some others that had nothing better to do. And all of that after fucking organizers went back and forth announcing countries were going to take part, only for them to announce that they wouldn't. In factuality, only 22 countries competed, but about this scandal we will talk later on. Here is where shit hits the fan, and you might have thought that it was already bad. Trust, from here we're only going to be going downhill, and we have only touched the surface of the authoritarian tyrannical iceberg. Unlike with Eurovision, Intervision was not organized by a broadcasting union full of broadcasters from separate countries. No, Russia 1 was the only broadcaster that organized this whole thing, and it was not a collaboration between countries or their broadcasters. No, it was coordinated between ministries, and the whole contest was organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, as well as Foundation for the Preservation and Support of Cultural Heritage and the Development of National and World Culture, Tradition of Arts, or whatever this fucking ass propaganda shit is, as well as Channel 1 and the National Media Group. It was run by the fucking Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Like, they're not even bothering with trying to hide what their whole goal of organizing the circus was. And here is where it gets even more insane. The main external sponsor of this buffoonery mess of a circus was the Ministry of Culture of the United Arab Emirates. This ministry surely pumped an ungodly amount of money into the Intervision project, so much so that it was constantly on display during the broadcast of Intervision, with the very logo being plastered on the LEDs and with the paid audience waving its flag, two displays of the sponsorship that were visible for the majority of the broadcast. And this only leaves me with so many questions. Why? What possible benefit does Abu Dhabi get out of bankrolling Russia's low-budget Eurovision knockoff? Is that how they managed to construct that poorly used stage? Is that how they funded the ungodly amount of AI that was used throughout the show that surely could have drained out the entirety of the Nile River? What kind of gain did they have from this? Is it because Russia exports a lot to them, with their main export being coked out Russian prostitutes to Dubai? Or is it just another chapter in the UAE's strange relationship with Moscow? Just so many questions, and we can only speculate. Aside from the UAE, the other sponsors included VTB Bank, Legend of Baikal, RWB, TMH, Dorožное radio. So I suggest that right now we break down this list a little bit more. VTB Bank is one of Russia's two biggest state-controlled banks. In 2022, it had about 33 trillion rubles in assets, with 8.2 trillion in household deposits. It regularly finances state projects and defense-related industries, directly supporting Russia's war economy and underwriting the very machine that keeps the invasion going. Moving on, we have TMH, Transmash Holding, Russia's largest producer of rolling stock. In 2021, it reported a revenue of approximately 311.9 billion rubles. Their trains and locomotives aren't just for commuters, they're also used to move soldiers, tanks, and weapons straight to the front in Ukraine. RWB is Russia's largest online retailer, and in 2023, its revenues were around 538.7 billion rubles, taxed and funneled into Moscow's federal budget, which in turn bankrolls the ruthless war effort of the Kremlin against Ukrainian civilians. So when you see Intervision plastered with these logos, remember, it's not just sponsorship, it's soft power theater paid for by these companies and governments helping sustain Russia's war in Ukraine. Another rationale as to why this whole spectacle is seeped with inhumanity. Let's redirect our attention now to the promotional material that can be found on the official Intervision website. These are the main objectives that the contest seeks to achieve according to the website. First one, unity through music. Yeah, sure, unity between the completely random grab bag of countries that they managed to rope in, and definitely not a terrifying parade orchestrated by the Kremlin, which only indicates Russia's desperate attempt to crawl back onto the international stage. This isn't about music, this isn't about unity, it's about forming an anti-Western club of regimes who share one thing in common, a burning desire to dismantle the so-called evil West. Moving on, we have top artists from across the globe come together on one stage to inspire and unite millions. Except the same government running the whole contest is simultaneously bombing hospitals, flattening Ukrainian cities and murdering civilians by the thousands, before, during and after the very contest. Because trust, nothing screams inspiring unity like cruise missiles slamming into apartment blocks. More than a contest, a platform for cultural exchange, advancement of dialogue and trust across nation. Translation, a glossy rebrand of propaganda and whitewashing of a genocide. And that trust across nations? Yeah, the same kind of trust Russia builds by destabilizing Europe with hybrid warfare targeting Poland, Finland, Estonia, planting spies in countries across the former Eastern Bloc, rigging elections in Moldova, Georgia and so on, and funding far-right politicians who are just waiting to sell out their countries just to cozy up to Putin and his potato farmer tradwife Lukashenko. Cultural diversity, honoring the unique heritage and traditions of each participating country, unless of course you're Ukraine, whose culture Russia is literally trying to erase while insisting Kyiv is just a lost Russian heritage that must rightfully return to its historic owner.
Украина целиком и полностью была создана Россией.
Nothing says honor like burning down your neighbor's house because you don't like the curtains or because they don't want to be associated with your heritage of bloody conquests, war crimes, and colonial expansionism. Music in the heart of your country, the official slogan. Let's be real, this slogan reads less like a music celebration and more like a shallow AI-generated response you get when you type in "make a new Eurovision slogan" that isn't exactly the same, just worded in a weirder and different way into ChatGPT, just pure AI slop. The whole contest. And oh boy, if you thought that the shared information was bad, just you wait. Because the real masterpiece of disaster wasn't in the sponsors, wasn't in the empty slogans, or even the UAE throwing its precious oil money into funding this abysmal display of Russian dick riding. No, the true horror show was the live broadcast of the contest itself, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined.
Интервидение. Международный музыкальный конкурс, где дружба и взаимопонимание могут преодолеть любые границы.
The broadcast of the show was beyond abysmal, and trust, if I wasn't going to record this video, I would have never willingly put myself through this torture. The main contributor to the tragedy of it all was, of course, the blatantly pushed Russian propaganda in every aspect, such as the long speeches from the very people who were in charge of Russia's war machines, aka Putin and Lavrov, but also the whole production of the contest. Intervision had no authenticity, it felt incredibly manufactured and fake. There was no joy, there was no excitement, it was clear that the contest lacked a soul. And with the lack of soul and with the lack of identity, we also had the desperate attempts of trying to outdo Eurovision in terms of production quality, but nothing was outdone. It was all very etapa națională, Moldova's national final for Eurovision, if they had an enormous budget. They tried to construct a massive stage, bring hundreds of props, give it that grandiose feeling, but those attempts were just miserable. It did not look expensive, it looked incredibly cheap and tacky. Even more, it didn't feel like the proper Eurovision, the virtuous Eurovision. It felt like watching a Temu ripoff of Eurovision. And with the organizers inserting little remarks about how revolutionary the contest is and how Russia is the safest, most welcoming host country, every 2 fucking frames, it genuinely felt like watching the Olympics of 1963. Another reason as to why the production just sucked ass was the miserable use of AI in everything. Worst part is, they were not even trying to hide it, they genuinely praised themselves for using it and proudly announced it in the beginning of the show.
На музыкальном карнавале культур сойдутся традиции разных народов и технологии будущего. Такое просто нужно видеть.
The key feature of their use of AI were these enormous sloppy AI giants. That were supposed to represent every country, or more like every ministry of culture of these states, wearing traditional attires representative of their culture that were everything but convincing. They were also featured in the postcards and some of the stage graphics for the actual performances.
This is disgusting!
And as one could reasonably predict, Russia closes off the flag parade despite not being last in the alphabetical order. With the longest scream time by far and the loudest ovations, we see the biggest AI giant dripping in gold and bedazzled with gemstones, just the pinnacle of Russian Kremlin kitsch, and the epitome of the narrative of the cultural superiority of Russia. Another key contributor to the soulless feeling to Intervision was the crowd, a crowd full of people that I suspect were paid to be there. Considering the low anticipation and low viewership and low viewing figures, you cannot tell me that anyone from these countries, the countries that took part in Intervision, flew to Russia just to watch the show live and in person, especially with the difficulty of entering Russia at the moment. So assuming that 99% of the audience was Russian, you cannot convince me that these people just had flags of Colombia, of Madagascar, of Qatar, of Ethiopia randomly laying around in their houses. And especially not the tons upon tons of flags that showed the logos of sponsors such as VTB and the UAE Ministry of Culture. The constant display of sponsor advertisement, the crowd full of random grandmas and kids dancing in circles and waving random country flags, the overhyped audience jumping around as if they have been instructed to act like maniacs. Otherwise, the snipers on the arena ceiling will just straight up shoot them in the jugular. They staged it to seem like Intervision accumulated a lot of attention, a lot of anticipation, staged to seem like it's the good, the virtuous version of what Eurovision could be without the woke, staged to be the perfect abuse of culture as a form of soft power of a brutal dictatorship. Another reason as to why Intervision felt so incredibly staged and manufactured was the voting system. And no, it wasn't the Soviet one where one had to switch their lights on and off to register a vote. The voting system was 100% jury-based, no televoting.
Но оценивать наших участников будут настоящие профессионалы. Продюсеры, исполнители, композиторы, музыканты и педагоги. У нас в жюри по одному эксперту из каждой из 23 стран.
Yeah. What the fuck? The jury consisted of one expert per participating country, and here I'm going to pose you with a very fair question. Shall we take a look into who these experts exactly were? For Belarus, it was Olga Schlager, the general producer of the National State Television and Radio Company of Belarus. That is, she works for Belarus' state broadcaster. Since the state media in Belarus is incredibly linked to the Lukashenko government and thus Putin, because it's heavily aligned with it and arguably controlled by it, she's part of a media apparatus that is used for pro-Kremlin propaganda and dissemination. Then we have Vietnam, Gundai, people's artist, graduate of the Moscow Conservatory. For India, it was Jean Nisar Lon, global president of the BRICS Culture and Media Forum. For Colombia, it was Jorge Ignacio Suraches, musician, former acting Minister of Culture of Colombia and now the country's new ambassador to Russia. Then we have Yassem Mohammed for the UAE, director of the UAE Ministry of Culture's Music Center. And for Russia, we have Igor Matvienko, a well-known Russian composer and producer, People's Artist of Russia, as well as a very prominent author that directly supports Russian talking points. One of his works includes writing the anthem of the Russian ground forces, Peret Pehota, meaning he's directly linked to Russian military symbolism and propaganda. Having only one juror per country means that even if one of them is aligned or part of a state media propaganda structure, for example Matvienko or Olga from Belarus, that country's vote is controlled via that one single person. The presence of state media producers or military symbol composers means that part of the voting pool is not neutral. Their role in culture and music is interwoven with political messaging and state ideology, which ultimately, as presented, backs up the narratives spread by the Kremlin. No public vote equals no democracy, which is fitting considering how the word democracy in Russia is considered dirty and merely an utopia. The Intervision voting system has zero amount of a broader democratic or popular input. It's more like a curated panel which can be influenced by states, authoritarian adjacent states that is. The whole conduct of the voting sequence was incredibly chaotic, just a pure state of pandemonium on stage, because many of these so-called experts did not recognize their points when they were shown on screen.
Second place is awarded to Egypt.
Then, for some odd reason, the voting and every single computer apparently crashed. And the Russian expert, the propagandist Igor Matvienko, makes the following statement regarding the results.
Прошу проверить все результаты, потому что вот тут иногда происходили какие-то вот с компьютерами сбои. Организаторы, проверьте, пожалуйста, все ли точно и верно, прежде чем вот мы объявим.
And here we have a little game of guessing. This could be because of A, some rigging allegedly, B, shite organization, or C, both. And you can be the judge of that, but something in my head, the minions in my head, are whispering and hinting to me that option C is most likely. If anything, the chaotic and quite frankly stupid voting system, marked by an unprecedented lack of transparency, just goes to show that the results were not important. The winner was not important. The narrative that it would push, that was the most important part of the contest. The key reason as to why Russia brought back Intervision was not about sharing culture through music. It's a purely soft power tool to launder Russia's image while it wages a colonial war against Ukraine. Originally a festival for the USSR and its former satellites, it returns as a Kremlin instrument stuffed with anti-Western narrative and new alliance. The goal isn't art. It's redefining geopolitics in order to give back space to Russia on the global stage. The strategy is simple. When you're banished away from global institutions, you create and build your own. And Intervision isn't the only example of Russia doing exactly that. Last summer they attempted to do their own version of the Olympic Games. These two are parallel stages designed to restore cultural and geopolitical clout by imitation, striving for new cultural and political alliances and to compensate for its exclusion from the actual events. On the 26th of May 2025, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine labeled Intervision as an instrument of hostile propaganda and a means of whitewashing the aggressive policy of the Russian Federation, while also ordering its foreign diplomatic missions to lean on partners or at least neutral countries to opt out of the propaganda-driven circus. You really don't have to watch the 4-hour-long contest to see through them. They admit everything out loud. Lavrov stressed, "We want Russia and the Russian people to be known. We consider the barriers erected by the collective West to be harmful. If by soft power you mean the opportunity to let others know about you, then of course we're interested in this." Meanwhile, the terrorist state's aggression in Ukraine churches on. While these 22 countries were singing live on the Intervision stage, under the message of unity and cultural appreciation, the Russian Federation was shelling Odessa region, the region that my ancestors were from. While AI postcards whitewashing Russia's image are playing, Russia keeps bombing Ukraine. Over the past 2 weeks, Russia has launched more than 3,500 drones, more than 2,500 powerful glide bombs, and almost 200 missiles at targets inside Ukraine, killing innocent civilians. The soundtrack of Peace and Unity plays over the reality of annihilation. Beyond Eurovision's camp, more galling for the Kremlin was Eurovision's role as a platform for countries once under the Soviet rule to showcase their independence and distinct cultures. Ukraine's multiple victories, including Jamala's 2016 song about Stalin's deportation and genocide of Crimean Tatars, directly challenged Putin's narrative that Ukraine lacks legitimate independent culture and history.
Украина целиком и полностью была создана Россией.
Putin has long claimed Ukraine belongs to Russia and they are one people.
We're not just close neighbors, we're one nation.
Hundreds of millions saw that Putin's Ukraine has no culture lie doesn't fly. Intervision is the attempted counter-programming. Yet for all the posturing, Intervision functions mostly as a domestic theater rather than an international outreach. Putin's broad strategy of constructing a patriotic Russian identity and culture while demonstrating that the country can thrive independently of European institutions, and of course to demonstrate the new Russian Brotherhood, consisting of mainly authoritarian states such as Belarus, China, Venezuela. Critique is not allowed. A free audience is not allowed. Appearing in clothes in the national colors of Ukraine, blue and yellow, is not allowed. It's entirely orchestrated to fuel a narrative, Russia's narrative of sweeping its crime under the rug through the means of culture. The Kremlin is pouring billions of rubles into soft cultural power around the world, even as it continues its war against Ukraine. Other examples can be found in every other cultural sphere, from museums to literature to religion, all of it. Let's redirect our attention to one of the main components of the Intervision broadcast, the not-so-hidden political agenda, mainly seen in the speeches held by Kremlin officials. The show literally kicks off with a 3-minute-long speech by Putin.
Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Уважаемые участники и члены жюри.
A 3-minute opener about dialogue, friendship and traditional values, framing Russia as a generous host and a garden of cultural diversity. Putin states in the speech that the modern world is changing and justice shall be served, justifying his brutal invasion of Ukraine in this way. Russia has always been and remains a country open to communication and creative cooperation. We cherish our traditions and respect the traditions of others, just not when it comes to Ukraine, and for that matter any country that it views as historically theirs. After the first performance, we cut to an interview with none other than Sergei fucking Lavrov.
Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov.
These two are guilty of committing some of the gravest crimes against humanity and are constantly breaching international law. Holding speeches during a live music contest should tell you everything you need to know about this orchestrated mess of a circus. Music is nowhere to be found when assessing the rationale behind Intervision. These speeches were not the only direct devices that the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs used to smear the viewer's perception of their propaganda conduct. The glazing of Russia as the last true superpower, faithful to its values and canonically right in its conduct of war and destruction, was also found in the interval acts. The show opening act was a duet performance of Dima Bilan, Russia's only ever Eurovision winner, and Polina Gagarina, a singer sanctioned by the EU for her loud support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, singing the song Nazare by the Russian group Alliance. Both have a reputation of publicly supporting Putin's regime, and the lyrics shove you into propaganda mode from minute 1 of the contest. Not really an interval act, but the participation of Russia in its own contest is very telling as well.
Ярослав Дронов, Shaman!
Russia was represented by Yaroslav Dronov, better known by his stage name Shaman. Last year, the European Union sanctioned him for supporting actions and policies that undermine the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Shaman is the sweetheart and the rising star of the Russian pro-war movement, and has performed at pro-genocide shows in illegally occupied territories of Ukraine. He's best known for his song I'm Russian, a nationalistic anthem released in 2022, in which he declares how the Russian people go to the end and stand in defiance of the whole world. Oh, and I forgot, he once simulated detonating a nuclear bomb on stage.
What? Call it a day.
I wish I was joking. After his performance, Shaman surprisingly held a speech because why not? Every war crime supporter is apparently.
Сегодня мы проводим этот конкурс впервые, а Россия выступает гостеприимной хозяйкой. Претендовать на победу. Я представляю Россию, а Россия уже победила. Победила тем, что вы все сегодня находитесь у нас в гостях. Я русский!
I have no words. It's so abundantly clear that the goal was not this contest, but the notoriety it brought to the Russian state. Afterwards, the hosts congratulate and glaze the shit out of this untalented wonker. But most importantly, admit that the outcome of the contest in terms of who wins is not important.
Ярослав, для нас вы все равно победитель. Поздравляем вас.
These two sentences again go to show that music and unity are not the main goal, are not the end goal, but to show how welcoming, wonderful the Russians are and how they welcome everyone. Everyone that is willing to be a mere player in their hands so they can say and do whatever fits their narrative. Everyone is welcomed, only those that do not go against the Kremlin. Most disturbingly, the show featured no winner's reprisal. The winner of Intervision didn't perform their victory entry after winning. Instead, we're shown a final act, a final demonstration of pure Russian unapologetic propaganda, with all contestants singing A Million Voices by Polina Gagarina together. Russia's vile and abhorrent Eurovision 2015 entry that preached unity and peace, despite the terrorist state illegally annexing Crimea and funding separatists in eastern Ukraine the very same year. The conduct and tactics of Russia have not changed a bit. Destroy, distract, repeat. Perhaps the most cynical part is the moral packaging. Intervision is marketed as a contest of spiritual and traditional values. Officials stress Intervision as a true celebration of music and it's free of perversions. This contest was used for spreading the quintessential Russian harmful rhetoric of the decaying West and the decline of values, aka hating on gay people and painting them as the root cause of all evil, despite Russia having the highest HIV rates compared to Europe and also having been internationally condemned for its many human rights violations. In practice, this means no queer visibility, no progressive politics, no open dissent. It's a sanitized, state-approved package where family values are just shorthand for repression. And the hypocrisy is glaring. Russia keeps nagging about its spiritual values while leading Europe in domestic violence, alcoholism, suicide rates, femicide rates, and school bullying. But those realities are buried under the ritual refrain of the hosts. How amazing it is to hear a traditional sound with a contemporary spin. Unlike Eurovision, where English language performances tend to dominate, Intervision participants sang in their native languages, pointing to a cultivated atmosphere that was meant to position Russia as a seemingly more accommodating partner than the globally oriented West. It is precisely this respect for cultural diversity that forms the core idea of the competition and inspires its participation to reach new creative heights, Putin claimed in his address. Claims about language coming from Russia are indisputably foolish. Russia has repeatedly suppressed to varying degrees the local languages and cultures of the more than 190 ethnic groups that call the country home and has historically tried to destroy countless of cultures and languages and continues to do so in Ukraine. One of the most common pushbacks I hear is, yeah, but Russian singers aren't their government. The problem with that argument is that in Russia, the two are inseparable. Just look at Intervision. Shaman, a sanctioned pro-war artist, is put on stage as Russia's face to the world. Or take the Olympics, where Russian athletes are literally tied to the military-industrial complex. Their success doubles as PR for the state. In Russia, culture is not an innocent playground, it's a pipeline of legitimacy, funding, and narrative reinforcement for the Kremlin. This is precisely why cultural isolation is sometimes necessary. Russia has waged an unjustified war against a sovereign state and keeps grossly violating international law. Russian military cynically kills thousands upon thousands of people and deliberately destroys the architectural heritage of Ukrainian cities. Under such conditions, any cultural cooperation provides Russia with new platforms for self-preservation. Every cultural cooperation with Russia in this context, every concert, every film screening, every international showcase normalizes those crimes. This isn't new as well. For decades, Russia has weaponized its culture to whitewash its reputation. Museums, literature, philharmonics, academic forums, all co-opted as tools to distract from war crimes and to reinforce empirical hierarchies. Russian soft power has always walked hand in hand with Russian tanks. Many prominent cultural figures, from curators to festival directors, have willingly cooperated with state institutions since Crimea's occupation in 2014. They cashed Kremlin checks, ignored the origins of the money, stayed silent as propaganda seeped into their work. These initiatives dilute responsibility, creating the myth that culture is somehow detached from politics, when in reality it has been one of the most reliable mouthpieces of Putinism. These unhelpful initiatives dilute the shared responsibility of all Russians for 22 years of Putinism, the current war in Ukraine, political passivity of the Russian society, failure and defeat of its civil resistance. The international community must understand that the current Russian invasion is a new colonial war on a sovereign and peaceful country, an attempt to restore Russia's imperial geopolitical blueprint. Ukraine's resistance is a decolonial struggle to break away from the former empire. Both countries' existential objectives will always remain mutually exclusive. Ukraine is fighting for its independence not only with weapons, so the cultural front is no less important than military warfare. That's why cultural isolation of Russia isn't cruelty, it's necessity. To collaborate with Russian culture during this war is to provide cover for imperialism. It tells Russia that the bombs can fall and theaters can still sing. Russia abuses and weaponizes culture as a form of hybrid warfare. The Kremlin knows the West romanticizes Russian culture. It exploits this by promoting the other Russia, the soulful artists, the spiritual depth of the Russians, the humanistic heritage. But in wartime, these are not neutral exports, they are information operations. A Russian artist is not just an artist, they are a part of a system where culture is an extension of state power. It's not that Russian culture lacks artistic value, it's that in the hands of an authoritarian regime, it becomes a tool of propaganda, manipulation and imperial domination. If Russian culture cannot reckon with its responsibility, if its intellectuals cannot collectively oppose war, colonialism and genocide, then it has no added value to the world right now. Russian culture distracts from Russian crimes. This big love for culture that Russians defend is merely a propaganda narrative. It actively erases it, with the most horrific example being the massacre that unfolded in the Mariupol drama theater in 2022. At the time, it was being used as a shelter, a refuge for hundreds of people trying to find safety as their city crumbled around them. And then Russia bombed it. It's estimated that around 600 people, mainly children, were killed in this grave war crime, now buried under tons upon tons of concrete that occupiers poured in order to conceal their crimes and swipe them under the rug. Russia uses Intervision and such homemade events, direct ripoffs of international ones, to expose you to Russia, to expose you to Russian culture and values, to desensitize you to the way they operate, on the way they act, radicalizing children in occupied territories of Ukraine, burning kids' books that are written in Ukrainian, kidnapping tens of thousands of kids that are Ukrainians to Russia. You are getting exposed to it. You get comfortable with the idea of it. You are not immune to propaganda. This is the part where we stop pretending. Intervision is not a neutral music show. It is a political instrument. Every camera cut, every staged interview, every page here is a part of a single project to polish the image of the aggressor state while the war it wages grinds on. If you tune in, applaud or financially support any part of this machinery, you aren't just watching a program, you're enabling the Kremlin's PR operation. Any artist who signs up for Intervision has to reconcile with more than just geopolitics. They willingly share a stage with people who actively support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That includes sanctioned pro-war performers like Shaman or Polina Gagarina. If you're singing alongside someone who's performed for occupation administrations, don't pretend it's apolitical, and don't pretend you're not a part of their individual legacy and their shared state legacy. One that supported an invasion and the attempts of crushing and destroying the Ukrainian people, their culture, their language, their whole existence. And about the music quality of Intervision, shite. Every fucking song would be dead last in Eurovision, and I won't go in depth and say anything nice or even comment on these artists because I won't be giving a platform to anyone that willingly travels to Russia, pays money, fueling the war economy, and be a part of a contest that whitewashes the Russians' war crimes in my second home. That's just not gonna happen. And even if the songs were masterpieces, that wouldn't erase the context. A platform that whitewashes war crimes and elevates pro-war figures should not be treated as a neutral cultural exchange. Every performance legitimizes the stage its own. I've heard one argument raised by a lot of Eurofans on social media. Yeah, but my country is not in Intervision. But it is in Intervision. I want to watch it so I can root for it. Let me ask you a very fair question. Is this how you want your country and culture to be presented to the world? Through Intervision, in a Kremlin-run showcase where the script, the audience, and the judges are tightly controlled? Do you want your flag waved by paid actors, your culture reduced to a photo op between speeches from Putin and Lavrov, your music used as a decor for a propaganda narrative? If the answer is no, then you shouldn't lend attention or legitimacy to Intervision. Another key argument made by Eurofans in favor of Intervision is that it's no better than Eurovision in its current state. Look, we as Eurofans best know the present situation. We know how hypocrisy has been a main feature of Eurovision over the past 2 years. We know how it offers a platform to another genocidal state to push harmful rhetoric. And while other great content creators have made amazing commentary pieces on this issue which I fully stand behind, these two contests are not the same. Intervision and Eurovision are not the same evil. And yes, Eurovision absolutely gives a platform to Israel, and Israel absolutely uses it to launder its image while committing atrocities in Gaza against Palestinians. But here's the difference. Eurovision does not give Israel 4 interrupted hours of prime airtime to control their entire narrative. Israel gets 1 performance slot, too much when it should be none, but still 1. Israel doesn't get to design the stage, write the host script, or shoehorn in propaganda speeches from Netanyahu. Intervision is tightly stage managed, and every second is crafted to serve Kremlin Russian propaganda. Eurovision's revenues don't funnel straight into the Israeli state. The contest is run by the EBU. Your YouTube view of a Eurovision clip doesn't go directly into the Israeli war budget. With Intervision, it does. The sponsorships, the broadcaster rights, ticket sales, even the clicks are routed directly and solely into Russia's economy and its state-linked institutions. So yes, Israel's presence at Eurovision is harmful, and many of us want it to be rightfully suspended. But Intervision is not just the same but Russia's version. It's worse because the entire event, not just one single performer slot, is designed as a Kremlin propaganda broadcast. Supporting Eurovision despite Israel is already fraud. Supporting Intervision is choosing to fund and amplify a war machine outright. Eurovision has problems, big problems. Intervision is the big problem. For all the billions of rubles, all the AI slop, all the stage-managed hospitality, Intervision still managed to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. And most of all, it proved that it was indeed the flop version of Eurovision that no one cared about and no one asked for.
And that is the truth of the matter.
One of the key aims of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs was to present the participating countries as their buddies, their supporters. They desperately wanted to do that with the US inclusion in the contest to push the narrative that the US is now a buddy of Russia and supports the Kremlin under the Trump administration.
The United States.
Yet that very attempt was halted right before the American artist was supposed to hit the stage.
По независимым от организаторов конкурса и делегации США причинам вызванным беспрецедентным политическим давлением со стороны правительства Австралии, певица Васи не сможет выйти на сцену в рамках сегодняшней конкурсной программы.
During the contest, TASS, Russian state-owned media, announced that the singer representing the United States, Vasi, would not be performing, and claimed that it was due to unprecedented political pressure from the Australian government, as Vasi is a dual citizen of both the US and Australia. The Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, meanwhile, said it had no engagement with the organizers of Intervision. Intervision's main failure was its failure to generate engagement. First of all, Intervision was not hosted through a body like the EBU, composed of national broadcasters. The broadcast of the show was spread through flimsy, unknown broadcasters in all participating countries. Another contributor to this demise was the issue of the time zones. An 8 p.m. start in Moscow is 1 p.m. in Cuba or Venezuela, hardly prime time. Performances had to be pre-recorded and broadcasted later, killing the shared live experience because nobody in Asia is tuning in during the middle of the night to watch this irrelevant circus.
I've said what I came to say.
This ultimately reflected in the viewership numbers, while TASS, the same Russian state-controlled media, reported that 4 billion people watched Intervision. That cannot be possible. It just cannot be. On social media, it's almost non-existent. Little over 4,000 Instagram followers at the time of writing, about 14,000 on Russian social media site Vkontakte, and approximately 45,000 on Telegram channel. Eurovision, for comparison, boasts 2.2 million Instagram followers. Not even comparable. On YouTube, Intervision's grand final broadcast scraped together 133,000 views. Eurovision's grand finale livestream on YouTube, you may ask, 13 million. Just no room for comparison, because this is so humiliating.
Yeah, keeping it real.
Perhaps Russia's biggest failure with Intervision is related to their aim of putting their traditional values on top as the centerpiece of Intervision, allegedly. This was hysterically crushed by Vietnam's victory.
It's time to announce the winner of the Intervision Song Contest!
Intervision was won by a gay Vietnamese twink. The jokes write themselves, mate.
I have to laugh. I'm sorry. This is so ridiculous.
So much for the endless propaganda about fighting Western degeneracy. The only thing that wanted to present as the moral backbone of the very contest collapsed the moment the results came in. And in terms of the future of this shenanigans, don't count on it. Sponsors won't want to keep throwing money at a Russian propaganda flop, and even partners like Saudi Arabia that will be hosting Intervision next year will probably not be too keen on the idea of hosting a 4-hour Kremlin ego-stroking marathon on their home soil. So it's dead. Its objectives are dead. The whole show is dead. And I'm going to wrap this up with a question to you, the audience. A question for the culture. Is it worth watching this spectacle just to discover these countries' cultural and musical scene through such a grotesque theater? Is it worth legitimizing a brutal display of propaganda that fuels a terrorist state, its ambitions for destruction and conquest, its ambitions to destroy Ukraine, a nation, a people, a culture? Is it worth it? Russia kills, Russian culture kills. Slava Ukraini.